In your work and in your research, have you had the opportunity to look at the impact of new technologies, things like nanotechnology, in terms of extending life? Is it possible that we can be thinking in 20 or 30 years' time of a person living to 120 or 130, or is that just out of the realm of possibility as far as we know it today?
Genetically, a lifespan of 120 or 130 is possible because we have a few people living on our planet who are reaching 110, 150, and 120. It's a minority, but it shows that our genes would provide us for the means to do so before we talk about genetic engineering or anything that would interfere with this natural mechanism, which could also prolong our lifespan.
Yeah, but I was referring to that age more as, not necessarily the exception, but as a general rule. Like we might view 65 today.
I understand your question, but we should see first of all, today, our life expectancy increases by 6 hours a day, about 3 months a year, about 2.5 years per decade. That is at least the average over the last 150 years. So we have started in the mid-19th century with life expectancies around 30, 35. We are now in Europe at an average age of around 80, which people can reach. And the major drivers in the past have been better nutrition, so the absence of famines, the ability to fight infectious disease, so we no longer die from influenza or other contagious disease. HIV/AIDS is absolutely an outlier in this respect. And with better sanitation, so we get fresh water that is pumped into our households, and we have water treatment for the water that goes into the sewage system before it's sent back to the river and ecological systems in many parts of the world. So these are the major drivers, or have been the major drivers, of an increased life expectancy over the last 50 or 60 years. And it has first translated into a lower child, infant, and young adult mortality, meaning that paradoxically, the higher life expectancy during the first 20 years of this development has led to a younger population because of more children surviving and getting into adulthood. It's only now that the extended life expectancy is more related to an increase in the age groups 50, 60, 70, 80 plus.
Going back to the 20th century, you mentioned earlier about the growth that we saw in the population in the 20th century. And that growth occurred despite the tens of millions of people that died in warfare and persecutions and things of that nature, and of which there were many in the 20th century. Was that a big factor, actually? If that had not occurred, would there have been a significantly increase in growth? And I guess the question is really related more to the 21st century, assuming we don't see the horrors of world wars in the future. Is that likely to have a big impact on population growth, or are there other factors that are keeping people from having larger families and will keep a smaller birth rate?
The death toll of the 20th century in Europe has been horrific. We are talking about 20 million people during the First World War. We're talking about 60 million people during the Second World War, but also due to the terror regimes, both on the Nazi side and on the Stalinist side. But if we combine 60 plus 20, that's 80 million people. And in the early 1990s, the world population was growing by just 90 million people per year. So to put it in perspective, we have to see that 2 world wars plus Nazi terror plus Stalinist terror have just been the equivalent of the world population increase of the year 1990. The same is with HIV/AIDS. We have maybe 3 million people actually infected. But when you compare this with today's 78 million people who are added every year to the world population, you still see that yes, it has an impact locally. The number of people in South Africa or in Botswana or in Lesotho is no longer growing because of high HIV infection rates. But no, it has no, say, lasting impact on the demographic situation of Africa or of the world as a whole. What has a lasting impact is fertility. Because children that are not born today will not be potential parents tomorrow. And so you have an echo effect a generation later. And I think the main driver of population change in the 21st century, besides longevity, is this much smaller fertility. So about half the population of our planet today already lives in societies which have fewer than 2 children per family. And as soon as the world average falls below 2 children, the world population will stop increasing after a certain period of time. And this is why we can predict that world population growth will definitely come to an end during the 21st century. We'll stop at 9.5, maybe 10 billion people. And in the 22nd century, which seems far away, but which will start in 89 years from now, we will probably see a drop in world population.
Even with people living longer because of technological developments, simply because of the growth rate indication?
Even with people living longer, it's only if we would find a tool that would make us live forever that this effect would not take place. But I don't see that yet.
What if China, though, were to change its policy? Instead of having a one-child policy, two-child policy. That has a profound implication simply because it's such a big portion of the world population, right?
China will soon drop its one-child policy. I'm pretty sure about that, because the one-child policy has been fully effective. China has managed to avoid something like 400 to 500 million births over the last 30 years. So, at the same time, because of the strong preference for male children, there is a distortion, an imbalance between the number of young girls and the number of young boys, which further reduces the chances of children in the future, because it's the young girls that will give birth in 10, 15, 20 years from now. So we have an even more reduced number of potential mothers. And this will soon lead to a drop in the one-child policy in China. But the effect will be limited, as the future number of potential parents in China will be fairly small compared to the large numbers of potential parents that we had 20 or 30 years ago in China.
Yeah, understood. This video is going to be viewed by thousands of people around the world. Are there any parting thoughts or comments that you would like to share with the viewers of this video about demographics or anything related to that?
It's important to understand that the development of world population is also something that is related to progress. We have better living conditions. Poverty, despite the fact that the world population has quadrupled during the 20th century, has not increased. We only have 1 billion people who do not have enough to eat on a regular basis. We only have 500 million people who do not have constant access to treated or clean water. And the proportion of this population to the world population in total has not increased during the 20th century. So there is a sign of progress, because we can produce a lot more food than we used to be able half a century ago. Now, the question is more about the sustainability of this green revolution, the sustainability of our lifestyle. Because on average, we are already using on our global footprint something like 2.2 hectares per head. And the surface on the world only provides 1.8 hectares per person. And for a population that would be 2 billion larger than today's, we are going down to something like 1.4 hectares per person. So we already live at the expense of the next generation. And so I think it's important to develop our lifestyle into something that is more sustainable. And so we are not preaching to forego a good life, but I think we have to look for much smarter solutions. So on the side of energy efficiency, on the side of how we feed ourselves, what kind of food we are producing. Just to give a small example.
Yeah, understood. That's why I'm very keen on the prospects of nanotechnology. It's sort of mind-boggling, some of the things that could happen, and I'm sure it will have an impact on things like food production and energy efficiency. I've been speaking with Rainer Münz, head of research at Erste Bank here in Vienna. Rainer, thank you very much for being with us. It's a real pleasure, and I appreciate you sharing this information with all of our viewers.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.